At 2:30 p.m. local time in the Caribbean Sea, two Venezuelan F-16 Fighting Falcons appeared on the horizon, flying low and fast, cutting across the sky just a few hundred feet above the waves. Their trajectory was not random, nor was it part of a training mission. Their target was clear: the USS Jason Dunham, an Arleigh Burke class guided missile destroyer of the United States Navy. Bristling with sensors, vertical launch cells, and advanced defensive systems, the warship was operating in international waters, conducting its standard patrol mission. For the crew aboard the Jason Dunham, this was not a drill. Radar operators detected the approaching aircraft almost immediately. The blips on the screen appeared fast, closing distance quickly. From the moment they appeared, the American crew knew what was happening. This was not an innocent flyby. This was a deliberate provocation, a calculated maneuver designed to challenge, intimidate, or provoke a response. The Pentagon later described it as reckless. According to reports, this was not an isolated incident. CBS News noted that it was the second such occurrence in just 2 days. Venezuelan jets had conducted the same aggressive maneuver before, and the repetition suggested intent rather than accident. But for the sailors standing watch on the destroyer's bridge and combat information center, official labels mattered less than the reality. Two Cold War-era fighters were now approaching at high speed, their afterburners leaving visible trails of heat and flame in the Caribbean sky. The context was significant. Only days earlier, U.S. forces had conducted a strike against a suspected cartel-run speedboat in the Caribbean. That operation killed 11 individuals and was immediately labeled by Washington as a success in the war on narcotics. In Caracas, however, the reaction was the opposite. President Nicolás Maduro condemned the strike, portraying it as a violation of Venezuelan sovereignty, and vowed retaliation. The aggressive flyovers of U.S. warships were a visible way for him to send that message. But in doing so, the Venezuelan pilots were exposing far more than they realized. When the F-16s closed in on the destroyer, their flight path brought them low enough that their shock waves rippled across the surface of the water. On the Jason Dunham's bridge, the response followed strict procedure. The crew stayed calm, maintained course, and let the ship's layered defense systems quietly handle the situation. The first formal warning was delivered via radio. On an open frequency, a calm, deliberate American voice transmitted, "Unidentified aircraft, you are approaching a United States warship operating in international waters. Maintain safe distance." There was no response from the Venezuelan side. Instead, one of the F-16 pilots lit his afterburner and blasted past the bow of the ship, leaving a streak of orange flame across the sky. Meanwhile, inside the Combat Information Center, the real engagement was already in progress, an electronic one. The ship's AN/SPY-1 radar, the core of the Aegis combat system, had detected and tracked the Venezuelan jets long before the crew could even see them visually. Altitude, speed, bearing, and electronic signatures were being continuously fed to the ship's systems. Weapons officers brought the ship's defensive layers to a ready posture. SM-2 surface-to-air missiles in the vertical launch system, Rym-162 Sea Sparrow missiles for closer engagements, and the Phalanx CYWS Gatling gun as the last line of defense. If the F-16s made a hostile move, the ship could engage and neutralize them in seconds. But rules of engagement were clear: no escalation unless directly threatened. The Jason Dunham was operating in international waters. Its mission was lawful. Firing without clear provocation would risk turning a tense encounter into a regional crisis. From the deck, sailors looked up as the second Venezuelan F-16 screamed directly overhead, so low that its shadow briefly passed across the destroyer's missile hatches. For those watching from the outside, it might have appeared that the Venezuelans had succeeded in demonstrating defiance, but in reality, the situation was reversed. Every radar sweep, Every burst of engine heat, every radio call the Venezuelan pilots made back to their bases was being captured by the destroyer's extensive electronic warfare suite. The AN/SLQ-32 system logged and analyzed radio frequencies, radar emissions, and targeting signals. The closer the F-16s came, the more data they revealed. Far from intimidating the U.S. Navy, the jets were providing it with valuable intelligence, a data trap that the Venezuelans had flown directly into. The USS Jason Dunham, like all Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, was designed for far greater threats than two aging fighters. Its radar systems could track hundreds of contacts simultaneously, from low-flying cruise missiles to long-range ballistic missiles. Against that backdrop, a pair of F-16, originally delivered to Venezuela in the 1980s, posed little real danger. Venezuela's fleet of F-16. A Fighting Falcons was once modern, purchased during a period of strong U.S.-Venezuelan relations. But decades of sanctions, poor maintenance, and the lack of access to American spare parts have left the fleet outdated. Many airframes are nearing the end of their service lives, avionics upgrades are limited, and maintenance is a constant challenge. Still, for Caracas, these jets remain symbols of national pride, loud, fast, and visually dramatic, even if technically inferior to modern aircraft. In contrast, the Jason Dunham was fully integrated into the broader U.S. Navy network. Beyond its own capabilities, it was supported by surveillance satellites, drones, and a nearby carrier strike group. The imbalance was stark, relics of the Cold War on one side, and one of the most advanced naval defense systems in the world on the other. As the F-16s maneuvered overhead, they continued to transmit radar signals, attempting to simulate targeting. To Venezuelan command, this may have appeared aggressive. To the U.S. Navy, it was an opportunity. Every radar waveform was cataloged and stored for analysis. Their radios, transmitting back to Caracas, revealed communications protocols and weaknesses in encryption. Even the afterburners, used so dramatically at low altitude, left massive infrared signatures that were logged by the destroyer's IR sensors. For American intelligence, this was invaluable. In military terms, it was like collecting fingerprints at a crime scene. Priceless data that could be used to understand how Venezuela's Air Force operated under stress, how its systems responded, and what vulnerabilities existed. The irony was clear. Venezuela intended to intimidate, but in doing so, it revealed weaknesses. Close-range intimidation may look powerful on video, but in the modern electronic battle space, every unnecessary radar pulse or thermal signature is exploitable. By the time the Venezuelan jets finally turned away, the Jason Dunham had neither altered course nor escalated. Its crew maintained discipline and composure. To the analysts watching from command centers in Norfolk and Pearl Harbor, the incident was a success, not for Venezuela, but for the United States. Washington's response was swift. The Pentagon labeled the maneuver reckless and provocative. President Donald Trump issued a direct warning. Any Venezuelan aircraft that endangered U.S. ships would be shot down. To reinforce the message, 10 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters were deployed to Puerto Rico, only a short flight away from Venezuelan airspace. These fifth-generation aircraft, unlike the aging F-16As, represented the cutting edge of aerial warfare, stealthy, networked, and designed to strike before adversaries were even aware of their presence. The Jason Dunham itself was not isolated. It was part of a larger U.S. naval presence in the region. Destroyers, cruisers, supply ships, and amphibious assault ships carrying Marines operated nearby. Overhead, P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft scanned the waters, while drones maintained higher altitude surveillance. What looked like a single destroyer on the horizon was, in fact, backed by the full weight of a U.S. task force. For Venezuela, the imbalance was stark. Its aging fleet could harass but not fundamentally alter the strategic equation. Lacking modern missiles, stealth capabilities, or sustainable logistics, the Venezuelan Air Force could not compete with American firepower. The flyovers may have rallied domestic audiences, but they did nothing to shift the regional balance. What they did risk, however, was escalation. A single miscalculation, a missile lock-on, a misinterpreted maneuver, or a failure to respond to warnings could have transformed the incident into live combat within seconds. For the U.S. Navy, the lesson was familiar. Stay calm, avoid unnecessary escalation, and quietly collect intelligence. Venezuela had sought to project strength, but instead revealed weakness. In military terms, it was a strategic misstep. And this was not unique. Similar incidents have occurred elsewhere. In the South China Sea, Chinese aircraft have attempted intimidation maneuvers, only to reveal electronic signatures in the process. In the Red Sea, Houthi fighters launched missiles expecting to score propaganda victories, but instead exposed launch sites and lost valuable assets. The pattern is clear. What may look like boldness in the moment often backfires into an intelligence windfall for the United States. By the time the Venezuelan F-16s returned to base, the Jason Dunham's crew logged the encounter as just another operational event. But the data gathered was far more important. Waveforms, communications, and thermal profiles were now part of America's growing intelligence library. The broader takeaway is simple. In modern military confrontations, discipline and restraint often deliver more than aggressive displays. Noise may play well on television, but in the electronic battle space, silence and data collection win the long game. The Venezuelan flyovers highlighted a critical truth. Restraint should never be mistaken for weakness. The U.S. Navy did not fire, did not flinch, and did not escalate. And yet, it emerged with the upper hand, while Caracas walked away having revealed vulnerabilities it could not afford to show. So the question becomes, if you were standing on the bridge of the Jason Dunham, watching two supersonic fighters dive low across your bow, what would you have done? Would you have fired a warning shot, or held steady and trusted the ship's defenses?